Thank you, Jim, for that ringing endorsement. I will try and find an equally ringing endorsement someday, but we'll not worry about that right now. So yes, my name is Bruno Berend. I am a senior fellow here at the Heartland Institute. A few months ago, a year ago or so, my title here was the director for, when I first started, was the director for the Center of School Reform. And I actually lobbied to have that changed to the director for the Center for Transforming Education, because it is my view, for what it's worth, that we've been reforming schools for 50, 60, 70 years, and every single gosh darn one of them is mostly a failure. The government education complex, as I like to call it, has the ability to pretty much chew up and spit out and subvert any idea of decent reform and turn it to just another way to spend more money for the complex. So why don't we stop reforming education and start transforming it? And it shouldn't be that hard. I mean, we're not talking about blowing it all up, although there are days where it makes you wonder. But we're not talking about blowing it all up. We're talking about actually just using the same policies that we've been talking about in the education reform movement and the education transformation movement to transform education instead of reform it. So with that in mind, I want to give you a little bit of an insight here that maybe instead of just another Q&A about school choice, which most of the people in this room agree with and like and maybe want to know one or two more things about it, let's try and push the envelope a little bit. And I want to tell you a couple little stories. One of the stories, they both involve the same gentleman, but there's a lot of research that's been going on outside of the education transformation or reform movement that they've been doing on education. And one of them was a guy who just basically took an old computer and put it in a wall next to his building. It was near a slum in India. And all it had on it was some directions on how to press some buttons and do some things with a mouse and a keyboard. And all these little slum kids, these are Indian slum kids, these are kids who are poorer than America's poor, sat at this hole-in-the-wall computer, which is what they called it, and started teaching themselves how to use computers and how to read without the aid of a single school or a single teacher or a single expensive brick-and-mortar entity, other than perhaps the wall that the computer was stuck in. So the person who did this, his name is Sagura Mitra. He's an Indian entrepreneur or a businessman or a researcher. He went on for a few more iterations of this, and here's the next really cool story. He takes 10 or 15 tablet computers. You know what these are. You know, everybody has one or seen one or something like it. He took a bunch of tablet computers like this, and he brought them to a village on a mountaintop in Ethiopia somewhere that had no school and no teacher, barely had running water, barely had electricity, but it just had these tablet computers. And he went to the adults and he said, all we want you to do is to open these boxes and show the kids how to turn them on. And they came back 3 months later to see what the kids learned off of the lock. I mean, this was no internet, no anything. All the kids knew how to do was how to recharge these little tablets. 3 months later, the kids had taught themselves how to read off of the software, without a school, and without a teacher. Now, we're not asking, I don't think anybody's saying, well, what we should really be promoting then is to just shut down all the schools and shut down all the taxation and just drop laptops from the sky, from helicopters, and everything will turn out fine. No, that's not what we're talking about here. But what we're talking about here is maybe pushing the envelope. And not really just talking about, oh, we should get a little $2,000 voucher over here, and we should have a little vouchers for only poor kids and do all this other stuff. All of these things are probably good ideas, and they're probably perhaps a good way to start. But you really want to go beyond that if you're talking about transforming education. So with that in mind, with our distinguished panel that we have here, the questions that I'm going to ask, and I hope the questions that you ask, go beyond, well, the school district that I'm in wants to raise my taxes and I'm not really sure how to do something about the administrators. We ought to be questioning the concept of school districts and administrators and why they even need to exist. And we need to kind of push past that kind of stuff. So my questions are going to kind of go in that direction. So with that in mind, I'd just like to start off asking the panelists some questions, and this is for all three of them, and they can answer them in the order that they want to. So if, gentlemen, if dropping off tablets from helicopters, or if homeschooling is succeeding as well as it is here in the United States for some of these people, why and how, try and explain it to the audience the best you can. What is the best way for us to take this idea of school choice, which is essentially the money following the child? How do we take that to the next step? How do we use the policies and the persuasion and the things that we have in our power in this movement, in the people who support this, to start getting to people to question the system as opposed to trying to fix the system? Ted, you start.
Oh, I start. All right. So, you started out by mentioning the complex, and the complex consists of a lot of bureaucrats, a lot of strong unions, and a lot of vested interest in the status quo. When we think about how much money we spend in education, there's a ton of money. And a lot of people are making their lives from it and making more than their lives from it. And so I think to try to change that system is going to be really tough. But in a sense, we were talking earlier, the same school choice discussion has been going on for a long time, and I think, Joe, you were mentioning that. And so there's a lot of reason to be pessimistic. The unions are, especially in Illinois, especially when we talk about the power of the status quo in Illinois. But I think there's a couple good pieces of news, and this kind of ties back into the tablets. The reason those tablets were so powerful is because kids could learn on their own. They were empowered with technology. And I'm not going to sit here and suggest that technology is the only solution to learning. But what I'm going to suggest is that technology may be what finally breaks down the status quo. I had a chance to be on a virtual school board. We made a proposal here in Illinois to start a school. And some of you may have heard about it. In the Fox River Valley. It would cover 18 districts. It was going to be a pure virtual school. And we thought we might get maybe 1,000 students out of that whole 18 districts, big region. We thought we might get 1,000 students, a very small amount, quite dispersed throughout that area. And what was amazing was when those school districts heard that we wanted to come in and create a virtual school and attract their students and their money, the superintendent said, "This is our mandate. These are our kids. That's our money. And you can't come in here and set up a virtual school." And what was amazing about the whole thing was how powerful the unions were. Representative Chapalavia, the superintendents at gathering resources, busing people from everywhere. They got so organized. They got their message out. And they managed to, for this school proposal, they managed to pass, they tried to pass a 3-year moratorium on virtual schools in Illinois. Now, in the end, they passed a 1-year moratorium that excluded Chicago, but that's how powerful they are. They're fearful of the technology and what it can do. But I say the good news is that they can't stop the technology, and it's already flipping classrooms. It's already changing how life works. So when you talk about the tablets, I think it's a great example of there's a real opportunity to leverage. Maybe it's a slow way, maybe it's a Trojan horse kind of way, but leveraging that technology just to kind of sneak in. And you know what? Teachers are going to lose control because kids are going to be more able to teach themselves, as will parents, through technology. But that's just a story of how things can change. But I think what we have to do is we have to allow for more innovation, and we have to work with the other side to help us make it happen, even though they can't stop it. But it'll be a challenge to get that, but I think over time it'll work in our favor.
So I represent a district out in the northwest suburbs of Chicago and Cook County, and many families have moved out there because the schools were better, right? At least that's what their real estate agent told them. And so we've now, I think, finally reached a point where people are not willing to just keep paying more and more and more for a better outcome, or what they perceive to be a better outcome. A colleague of mine was sharing with me a poll that was done just about a year or two ago. And the question went something like this: are you willing to pay higher property taxes or higher tax rates if you are guaranteed a better outcome with your schools? And my colleague told me for the first time in his knowledge, the majority of people responding to that poll said, no, we're not willing to pay more. And I think it's finally a realization that just throwing more money at education is not necessarily going to give you a better outcome, or the negative consequences are going to outweigh whatever perceived positive benefits there might be. The other thing I wanted to mention is, to dovetail off something Ted said about technology, just on Monday night this week, I attended a large gathering of suburban administrators and school board members. And the topic of conversation had to do with technology in the classroom. And they were talking about tablets in the classroom. And both teachers and administrators and also students themselves were singing the praises of having these tablets and having the ability to customize curriculum instruction for each individual student. And so they showed the 10-minute video of the students using these tablets, and then the teacher was just kind of going around the room just checking to make sure that all the students were doing their work. But every student was doing the work on their own pace. And then the teacher was just there to provide a little bit of instruction. So there already are these huge fissures that are happening, and these are in the public schools. Imagine what's going on in homes across America, you know, the Khan Academy and all these, just this plethora of resources that are now available to students at all income levels. It's really a revolution, I think, that we're just on the cusp of.
I would agree with all of that. And one of the things I've learned over the last 30 years is that people who are on the front lines of these public policy battles are often the last ones to realize how much progress is taking place or how close we are to actually winning. Because we're always facing the enemy. All we see is the enemy. And we don't look behind us and realize how much territory we've conquered, how much progress we've made. So there's 1.6 million kids attending charter schools today. 1.6 million kids out of regular public schools now attending charter schools. We didn't have that 10 years ago. We've got almost 250,000 kids attending private schools on vouchers or tax credits. 250,000 kids. It's doubling every year. I mean, it's definitely on a big increase. We've had more progress on school choice nationwide in the last 4 or 5 years than we saw in the previous 20 years combined. So this is reaching a tipping point. Part of it is technology, absolutely, and we're seeing this revolution taking place outside of public schools. Any business that wants to teach its staff various things, they don't set up a traditional classroom and bring in a teacher and a chalkboard. It's all with video learning, online sessions, go to conference kind of technology. And that will revolutionize education. It's absolutely inevitable. The opposition that we face, teacher unions and especially administrators who act as if it's their kids and their money and their budget, they are really tough. And that is why progress has been so much slower in the education arena than virtually any other arena that we've tried to work on. When Heartland got started 30 years ago, this was the first issue we addressed. The very first op-ed piece that we got published was calling for school choice. 25 years ago, we were out talking to superintendents, talking about what if Illinois got a voucher program? How would you react to that? What would you do? And interestingly, most of them said, I would start a private school. They love kids, they love to teach, they wanted a small school. It was really kind of touching. But until and unless that program existed, they would oppose it with every fiber of strength, because it was their rice bowl. You're going after the fundamental income of hundreds of thousands of teachers and administrators, and that makes it really tough. But I predict in the next 4 or 5 years, I think the next governor of Illinois is going to sign voucher legislation. I don't doubt it at all. I'm sure the next governor will. It might be a pilot program for Chicago, or it might be something statewide. We can hope for the latter, settle for the former. But this state is way out of line now with other states and the rest of the country. It's time we caught up, and that's going to happen. Haroof.
This question's for Tom and Ted, given because it's specifically to Illinois and the work that you've done here. And this dovetails perfectly with what Joe just said. So how do you, assuming Joe's accurate, assuming there's a pathway to that scenario, that we're going to get voucher legislation or choice legislation of some form here in Illinois, Walk the audience through how that might happen, how it might be sold, and throw some, political consulting in there, if you will. One of the biggest battles I've always noticed is to convince the suburban soccer mom that money following the child is actually better for her child than funding a unnecessary and completely wasteful government entity called a school district. So how do you work that into the system so that someone actually votes for it?
I think one thing to do is just to be careful about how you promote that plan to the citizens. Because certain entities have been very effective at shutting down any kind of reform initiatives. The word voucher, for example, has, for whatever reason, it doesn't have very good connotations. Maybe it has, who knows why, but for whatever reason that word voucher doesn't really sell well to the suburban soccer mom. But when you call it an opportunity scholarship, it's the same concept really, but for whatever reason it polls better, and so just being careful about that would be one way of pushing that initiative, where the money follows the child.
So Ted, let me follow up on that really quickly and ask you this question. So one of the things I've always wondered is why our side, let's put it this way, we've done a fantastic job of talking about how wonderful vouchers are and how they can improve education in America, particularly for the nation's poor and underserved. Why have we done such a bad job, or why have we not as effectively made people angry? What Tom was saying about their property taxes and other taxes. Why have we been so afraid to engage in the very, very powerful political tool of negative campaigning?
So, there's, I think there's a case where the left always is successful is they do a really good job of making the moral case. They always make the moral case for why those children need more money. You take the worst neighborhoods, it's never about the failures of the administration or the process. It's always about they lack money. And something we fall into is we fall into attacking the unions, we attack the administration. And maybe that just doesn't sell that well. And so what we're trying to do now is trying to make the moral case using the same person that they call the victim. We want to make them the hero. And so when you think about it, Josh Dwyer's back here in the back, and he just wrote the paper that trapped the kids that are trapped in the worst schools in Chicago, and he's got a follow-up on Illinois. But we looked at the 10% worst schools, and if you look at the chances of those kids making it out of there, we found that only 4 out of 100 kids, 4 out of every 100 kids in the Illinois' worst schools will be college ready. So that's like sending 100 kids out on a ship, but giving them 4 life rafts, life preservers. 96 aren't going to make it. And it's really sad, and I think that's the moral case we've got to make, that system is broke and these kids are trapped. And if we do a better job at that, I think our solutions will start to sell better. That's one. So I think we got to do a better job of making the moral case. Number 2, I think the problem is that we don't really have an action plan. And I'm going to ask this question in just a second, but when you look at what happened when we tried to create this virtual school, the other side, they knew exactly what to do. They knew how to call the people, get the buses organized, get them there. They flew in a representative from Tennessee who talked about virtual schools. They had a whole plan. They had an action plan, executed in 2 days like that. I would ask all of you here, if tomorrow we wanted to do an event, all of us, if we want to do some pro-school choice action tomorrow, I don't think any of us would know what to do. We could go to Springfield and walk around, but we don't really have a plan. And I think that's what's missing, which leads me to the third point, and I'm sorry I'm going a little long here, but I think what we need to do is think more in a campaign-style mode. The unions are there every day. They're marching every day. They're in Springfield every day. We on our side, we pop in when we think the moment's ripe, and then we disappear for 6 months, and then we pop back in. And those things all are counterproductive. So we need to think a little bit better about how do we create a campaign that wins over hearts and minds through making the moral argument, and then having a better organization to do that. And that's a big job. That's where we want to head in terms of the movement.
Let me just do a follow-up question here on that. The system not just the unions, but the teachers, the districts, the administrative functions of the Illinois Association of School Boards and the school superintendents and all that. It's about I mean, they have a lot of money, and they spend all that money defending the system. What you just described of our side having a plan and actually executing that plan, that's a function of money as well. Really quick answer on this one. Is our side underfunded, or are the funds misallocated?
Let me answer that. Hell yes, we're underfunded. and you're going right where I was going to go with this. I don't think it's about messaging. I mean, this movement has spent decades trying to make sure that we're communicating with minorities, that we have minority spokespersons, that we express compassion, that we tailor these programs for low-income people and minority people. I mean, this is all about messaging. And it makes no difference at all, because the other side outspends us 100 to 1. Because the business community in this state in particular is just completely cowed by the other side, by the politicians, by the teacher unions, by the mainstream media, so they're not willing to fund it. If we had anything like the funding of the other side, even a decent, two-digit fraction of what the other side spends, I think we'd be able to have that action plan and make it work. I think what Scott Walker showed up in Wisconsin, and before him, Mitch Daniels in Indiana, you know the public is with you. They want to improve schools. They want better education. So don't waste your time running ads thinking that you got to influence public opinion. Just make sure you get a majority of those legislators willing to show a little bit of backbone and pass the laws that you need to change the system. Mitch Daniels loved to say it's amazing how little criticism you get after the law is passed. So you cut a massive subsidy program, and he says nobody misses it. And it's like, they were all up in arms when it was being voted on, but the minute the program disappears, all those interest groups that fed at that trough just disappear. So he says it's about political courage. Just get it done, and then the rest of the pieces kind of fall together. So get it done, sir.
So on that note,
You'll do it.
and I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and ask a policy question. And then, Joe, this is for you, because I don't know if you are the actual originator of this idea, but if not, you're probably pretty close to one of the originators. And this was a slight, kind of like just a really quick policy shift on the idea of a voucher, and that is the education savings account. And try to describe for the audience what an education savings account is, how it might actually create an umbrella layer of money following the child and activate all of the other reform options or transformation options that are out there.
All right, so education savings accounts, to the best of my knowledge, it originated in California. Some of the original voucher legislation that was being debated back in the 1980s had education savings accounts, interestingly, not a traditional voucher. So all parents of school-age kids would get an account similar to their HSA or their IRA, and that would be earmarked just for spending money to educate their kid. And that money could be used for tuition for sure, but it could also be used for tutors, computer programming, computer equipment, retreats, seminars, visits to the museum, whatever you wanted to do. You could put together a portfolio of providers that's just as unique as your kid is unique, and then kind of finance it out of this account. The government would put money into the account, and you would take it out probably nowadays with a debit card. We then proposed that back in the late 80s to the New American Schools Foundation. They had done a national competition for break the mold school reform ideas. And so we came up with a very detailed proposal for education savings accounts. We came very close to getting it. We were one of the top, I think, 14 out of 850 proposals, and they funded the top 12. They were going to fund the top 15 until we ended up number 14. Then I think they changed it to 12. I really do. I think we were all set to buy tickets to go to New York to get the grant, and we were told, oh, they just decided not to give to you guys. So, but that's the history of the idea. Now Arizona has a pilot program with education savings accounts. Very small number of families. Is it 600? I think it's about 600 families are using these savings accounts. They raise lots of interesting issues. They tie in really nicely with digital learning because now education is migrating out of classrooms, and so it just makes sense to envision parents doing this. Not all parents are going to be able to manage something like that. It requires a different skill set, certainly than the old model of just send your kid to public school and not even call the teachers. So we're going a long ways away from the traditional model of public education with this. But it's a great idea.
And I've had my staff draft a bill that does that for Illinois, and I'm going to be filing that this spring, an education savings account.
Terrific. So to the both of you on the Illinois Policy Institute, you Ted, and your bill, Tom. So is that bill only for a small number of students? I mean, and this goes right back to the political question on this, because this is politics, and this is having to beat a powerful political opponent. Are we actually configured against ourselves because when we limit a choice program to only the very poor, it does two things. It allows all of the other people who aren't getting the choice program to say, that's not for me anyway, so I don't care about it. And then it leaves only the poor people, half of whom don't understand what it is we're trying to do to help them, and the other half who are all for it but just don't have the political clout. Is there a benefit politically to just come out and make this thing non-means tested and say anyone who wants to avail themselves of an education savings account of this amount can do so?
Well, my bill does have provisions dealing with how much household income there is. I think it's, and the benefit is on a sliding scale. I think it goes up to 2.5 times what the poverty level is. I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it's just going to be very hard to sell it to the general public without first, creating that crack and saying, look, it's unconscionable that we force students in the city of Chicago to stay in failing schools. I mean, out in the suburbs, there's a little bit more choice. Maybe the family has a little bit more income. They have a little bit more discretion on what school the children attend. But to just start somewhere, I mean, I would like progress to move a lot faster, but...
Ted, could we make something like that universal inside a small pilot area, or just throw some ideas against the wall, see what sticks?
Those of you who know me on pensions and the work that we've done on pensions at the Institute will know that I'm not much of a compromiser for real reform. And when you talk about pensions, we're broke, so there's no halfway of fixing pensions from our perspective. When it comes to school reform, Bruno, I think it's a little bit different. So I am like you. I would much rather have everybody vouchers. Let's move on. Why shouldn't every family have a choice? I always give the example of my daughter who she's just great at Spanish. She's a senior now, but she had to take Spanish again because that was the rule. And I would have liked for her to have had choices of what she did, but she had to take Spanish 4, and that was just required. It's kind of silly. She already spoke it. But I think the bottom line is as much as we'd like to be as aggressive as possible, I think we're pretty much in the bluest of blue states. And so to try to pass a massive bill where people at New Trier don't really care about choice, they've got the good school, and you've got quite a few, I think people here might be in good school areas. I would argue they could be better, and that each individual kid could do better on their own if they had choice. But I think in this case, we've got to pick our battles. And we've got to, nobody, I would like for, Chapala-Villa, Representative Chapala-Villa, to be able to go up to a kid in the lowest performing schools in Chicago, take the worst school take Fenger High School, low performer for, 16 years, is it, Josh? 16 years it's a failed school. And then tell the parent of that mother, of that child, that no, you have no choice, you must attend that school again. Because I don't think anybody should have that power over a family like that. So I think that's one we can win if we can do it well. I don't disagree with you long term, or I'd love to have that opportunity now, but that's just, I think it's too much to ask for time to pass.
Let me interrupt. I'm trying not to scowl and growl, but we've been trying to create that crack for 30 years, okay? Somebody's got to go into the crack and exploit it and make something happen. And in these wealthy suburban communities, there are parents who would love to send their kids to a religious school, or spend that money on homeschooling, or send them to a military academy so that he gets away from the gangs and the drugs that are at New Trier. I mean, there's plenty. There are.
Yeah, I agree. Joe is right.
Absolutely.
And how many does it take? It only takes 5 or 10% of the parents who feel that way, and they get motivated, and they have money. when you try to build your base in the inner city of Chicago, you're building it on the worst possible foundation. These are people who don't have money, they don't have political contacts. That's why they're powerless. That's the very definition of it. The black ministers here are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. You hear that over and over again. They're not going to come around to your side. They might show up at some of your events. They might endorse you for as long as you can make contributions to their church, but they're not going to be there long term. If this thing is going to work, it's got to be a universal proposal.
Joe, if I may just make a couple comments, and I don't disagree with you fundamentally. Here's two problems. You know, when there's a bill proposed 3 years ago, Reverend Meeks was trying to get this bill passed, and one of the things he did was he got a bunch of kids, African American kids from the South Side, bust them up to New Trier. And I tell you what, scared the hell out of New Trier people because they didn't know what that school choice meant. Now school choice meant that every school will be
Free and open.
Free and open,
Yeah.
and you have a, I moved to Wilmette or Winnetka to go to New Trier, and I pay huge taxes, and now this model is going to totally screw up my house values, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of education that has to be done at that level. So I agree with you, but I think it's very complex. I had a second point, but I forgot it. So
It'll come back.
yeah, it'll come
Yes,
back.
it'll come back. Well, feel free to jump in when you get it.
And I'm lousy at
But I
politics.
think, what Joe said
I'm
is.
sure you guys are right.
Oh, can I make a point?
Yeah, go, yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is I think, Joe, and I don't know, I don't know enough about the long-term history, but I think we've been pretty lousy at building coalitions. The other side's great at building coalitions. They do them very well for obvious reasons. We don't do them very well. And I think we're missing an opportunity by not partnering with people. I think that the people in those worst areas, in those worst schools, would like choice and freedom and a chance. I just don't think we've ever figured out how to work with them to make that happen. And so, yes, I can be skeptical about the difficulty, but I think it's something that we have to try.
Well, I mean, there are 6 Catholic schools that are scheduled to close after this year, and if I'm not mistaken, all 6 of those schools are in very poor neighborhoods. And, just giving those students an opportunity scholarship to go to one of those schools. And CPS still retains some of the state funding that they otherwise would have gotten. I mean, I see that as a win-win. And to Joe's point, he's right. There are quite a few families out in the suburbs that would prefer to send their children to a religious-based school or homeschool. They're paying twice. They're paying the property tax, plus they have to try to scrape up the funds to pay for tuition. And most of the models I see, again, there's no real loss to that local public school because they're still getting some money with one less child in that classroom. And it isn't, aren't we always talking about the benefits of smaller class sizes? Well, this is a way to achieve that and make the parents happy and benefit the student.
Well, I'd agree with you on that. I'll take moderator's prerogative here for a moment and say that one of the things that has always flummoxed me is why, how do we, it's not why so much, but how do we undermine, and I have no problems using that word, how do we undermine public support for an overpriced, overstaffed, administrative-heavy, district-based system, which is, as you described with what Reverend Meeks did, nothing short of educational apartheid. And I make no apologies for using that strong language. When white suburban parents are saying, we don't want those kids in our school, that is what they're supporting. And they are supporting a district-based system that, quite frankly, no one in this country really ever voted for. So with that in mind, a perfect opportunity to bring you to the next question, which goes to the Common Core. I've testified against the Common Core, certainly not as much as Joy Pullman has here at the Heartland Institute. The document she put together is fantastic. I have thought of the Common Core as perhaps the last gasp of the centralized, top-down franchise of the Department of Education, franchise of the State Board of Education, district system, where it makes the suburban parent actually think that the money going into a black hole of a district is more important than the money following their child. But the Common Core is it or is it not offering us an opportunity to finally demonstrate just how counterproductive, centralized, and ineffective such a system is from the standpoint of what the Common Core does and how it works. Ted, we can start with you.
Start with me. I would agree that it does all the bad things that you say. If Obamacare wasn't enough of a lesson about centralizing something, I think Common Core is just the next step. Right now, federal funding is only about 11% of what states get, and I think the ultimate goal would be to take it higher and higher and higher and have more and more federal control. And how do you do that? Through curriculum. How do you sell your message? Through curriculum. I think most people here would understand. Do most people know what Common Core is, and are they all against it here? Who's for Common Core?
Anybody in the room for Common Core?
Oh, yeah. You change your mind. No, so I don't need to pitch on why it's bad, I don't think. I think it's a tough one to try to. We have to fight it. I don't know, and somebody else here might know better than me how easy it is to message against Common Core, because it sure sounds like Affordable Care Act, right? It's just got all the right soundings. Why shouldn't we have standards? Shouldn't we have standards for our kids? To measure up against Sweden and everybody else? It sounds great. Shouldn't kids learn a certain amount of math? It sounds so appealing, and so I think we have a big challenge to keep fighting it. I think the battle's going our way, but the fact that so many people jumped on it to begin with is quite worrisome, and it makes the battle to make them revert that much more difficult. But yeah, it's just the next big move, and I think we have to battle it.
Bob Holland, a senior fellow for us who works remotely, calls it Obamacore.
Obamacore, right?
Tom?
Well, I'm admittedly not as great an expert on Common Core as I should be. In my first term, I was actually on the House Education Committee, and for whatever reason, they moved me off that committee. But I've tried to keep an open mind about Common Core because I've got constituents who are writing me on both sides of it. And I'll tell you that I am very skeptical about it because of the federal nature of it, the heavy-handedness of it. But this is what the other side is saying. So these pro-Common Core functions I've attended.
Could you briefly do a little more description of what it is?
Maybe one of these other guys could better describe.
I'll take a shot at that, or Joe can. Joe, you go ahead. I'm the moderator.
All right, so it's Common Core Standards, which is a curriculum connected to a set of exams and evaluations. The states, 45 states, 47 states, adopted Common Core standards as part of their application for waivers from the No Child Left Behind, and in order to qualify for grants under Race to the Top, which was Barack Obama's stimulus package. So a lot of states agreed to implement this thing without really looking under the hood and seeing just what it was. And in fact, the curriculum wasn't even finished, and the tests weren't designed, and it's still not finished. So it was kind of a controversial thing that was kind of hurried into being. The big problem with it is liberal, from my point of view, liberal activist groups, which control so much of teachers, colleges, and the education establishment, got their screwdrivers into this thing. And now it's all politically correct stuff. It's all anti-family, it's all anti-religion, it's all anti-free enterprise, it's all collectivist drivel, it's absolutely garbage. Google, what is it, story killers? I sent around an email earlier today. There's a professor at Hillsdale College who gave a lecture on Common Core and did just a fantastic job. And I think the title of his talk was Story Killers, something or other. His last name is Moore. But it's a 45-minute lecture, and it just takes apart Common Core. This is definitely dumbing it down. This is definitely partisan politicization of curriculum. There was a reason why the Founding Fathers didn't put schools and education in the Constitution. You can read that document. The words never appear in there. And it's because education was too important to be trusted to the federal government. They didn't want government getting involved in education. Jefferson was really clear on that point. That was the source of civil wars in Europe, was allowing governments to manipulate schools. So keep them out. So, they succeeded for almost 200 years. Now they're coming in with Common Core. To your point, Bruno, I think it's a great organizing issue. And I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see millions of parents get mobilized on this thing. And it is a good opportunity to get parents off their sofas and into the streets and get them to understand that public schools today are not the schools that they attended 20 and 30 years ago, and they got to go. It's time for a real change.
Well, it's the anti-tablet.
The anti-tablet.
It's the anti-tablet.
Actually, I'm going to close with an example of exactly how that works. That's a very good point. I'm going to jump on that. But before we close, we have a. Did you want to?
I just want to just add
Go.
one,
Okay.
one thing is that, you know, and you were talking about the whole district model and the complex. The Common Core goes exactly against making education local and making parents care more and having the local community care more. And you know, I think all of us here would agree that the more local we can make education, the better off. We hold parents accountable, parents hold teachers accountable, and schools accountable. Once we federalize this dadgum thing, you know, I worked for Citigroup for many years, and at one point I realized that, you know, you couldn't make a decision unless you called New York head office. Nobody could make a decision. It was so centralized. And that's what happens in government. That's what happens if you have a federal system. So this is very much against local control, and that's why we're so opposed to it.
Well, in a few minutes, we were talking about just how parents do want to, you know, how they do already and how they want to have the freedom of access or the freedom of mobility. I just want to illustrate a quick point. When I was a teacher, I was at a local Christian school. And I'll never forget, the headmaster of the school would start out every school year with all the teachers, you know, in the assembly room and say, just remember who our customers are. The parents are our customers. And so just starting the school year with that tone that we are there to serve them, and they can very easily take their dollars elsewhere if we don't serve their needs. If their children don't excel in the school, they're going to go elsewhere. And so anyway, we need more of that competition.
Especially when you're competing with a free alternative, or theoretically free alternative. So the next question is for Joe, because I think the audience probably
Wants to start asking questions.
wants to start asking questions, right? But I wanted to get this out there because I think this is actually one of the more important things Heartland has been involved in, because this offers another opportunity, particularly here in the state of Illinois, to do something entrepreneurial for education transformation. Heartland, along with some aggressive political entrepreneurs in Texas, was involved with a lawsuit arguing that the district system in that state was unconstitutionally inefficient because they had a constitutional clause that said people had a right to an efficient education system. Tell us about that theory and whether it worked, whether it might work later, whether it got a camel's nose under the tent, or whether we might be able to do something like that here in Illinois.
It hasn't worked yet in Texas. So the Texas Constitution requires an efficient system of schools. The legal theory was if we can show that the system could be made more efficient by allowing competition and choice, then a judge should rule that you should allow some competition and choice. And the lower judge, district judge, was not impressed by that and threw it out. The state Supreme Court in Texas, though, was dominated by rock-ribbed Republicans who, in past decisions, have made it very clear they're interested in school choice as an alternative to these annual big knockdown fights over the funding formula, just like Illinois, where the school districts are always suing the state for more money. Same thing in Texas, same thing in most states. So school choice is a way to provide some of the efficiency without increasing spending. So I think it's a good idea, but I'm not a fan of relying on courts to try to solve this thing. I don't think there's much of a track record of success in that. And of course, here in Illinois, our Supreme Court is very partisan in the wrong direction. So I don't think it's going to happen here.
Okay. Is there any benefit, and either one of you can answer this, obviously Illinois Policy Institute does some work with Liberty and Justice Center. One of the flip side of that, which may make your point, it may go against your point, Joe, is that one of the places we see school choice die is in the courts because of various decisions, or it's up for getting killed in Kansas, it's been killed in New Jersey in various different ways. Is there any kind of a legal strategy, is there any kind of a way to use the courts to defend school choice if and when it does actually pass?
So I don't have any silver bullet that I know of. What I do think is something we need to think about more, and Joe has touched on it, are the educational savings accounts. And what's neat about them is that the money is given to the families into this account that they own and control, and then they spend the money, and that helps avoid some of the legal battles that if it's a voucher, then the state's giving effectively the money directly to a Christian church, a religious school, and so therefore that's illegal. And so there are ways of breaking that down. That's one about, can we use education savings account to get around that problem? There's another great problem that I'm not sure if Joe mentioned it, but what's neat about educational savings accounts is that, as opposed to vouchers, so when a family gets a voucher, it's an amount, and that's what they have to spend. They spend the whole thing on the school. With an educational savings account, the consumer, the family has money, and they choose how to spend that money. Maybe something on a couple courses here. They can shop with that, and what that does is it creates competition. It creates pricing competition among the providers of educational resources. And that's what we're missing in education, right? We don't have a market. There's no market for education. The prices are set by how much the government can raise, and then they set this kind of, here's the money that's left, and they distribute it out, and that's what's spent. What we need to do is invoke competition, and so I think that's one of the ways to do that.
All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to open the questions up for the audience. I think it's a small enough room. I don't know that we have to hand a microphone anywhere around, but when I call on you, just raise your hand, stand up, and in a nice, bold voice, say who you are, what your question is, and who you want to direct it to. So, sir, you can go first.
Okay. I'm Bob Angelic. I'm a former teacher, taught for 37 years. I'm still a union member, by the way. One of the arguments that teachers use when I get into this discussion is that alternative schools will siphon off the best kids and leave the public schools with kids that are more difficult to deal with. How would you respond to that comment, that belief?
Well, I think it's not exactly valid. I mean, parents will choose to send their children to a school for a number of reasons. Some has to do with proximity to the home. Some has to do with the types of extracurricular activities that are offered, band or athletic programs. The other thing too is I remember being a middle school student, and the headmaster of our school, local Christian school, put the offer out to the Chicago Public Schools. Give us whichever students you want. We'll take them. Give us half what you would normally spend on them on a per pupil basis. And let's see how the results turn out. And I think he even said if the kids don't do better after 2 years, we'll return the money. It was something like that. And of course, the challenge was not taken. But let's just say that we do siphon off the best kids, academically. Wouldn't it reduce class sizes? I mean, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. If a teacher, and I can share this from firsthand experience, if I could spend more individual time with students, I could help that individual student perform better, understand the material more thoroughly, more quickly. And so, why don't we take these professionals and allow them to have more of that one-on-one time with the struggling students?
I might add, if you look at the 10 best schools in Chicago, the 10 best schools in Chicago that are open enrollment, not the selective schools, not the magnets and the ones that pick out the best, but just the open enrollment schools. The top 10 are charter schools, mostly made up by Noble charter schools. And what's amazing about that is that if you look at the makeup of the top 10 charter schools, they look demographically just like the other CPS schools in terms of low income. They're all low income, same amount of African American, Hispanic. So I think what that tells you, and Josh did this study, but if you look at their scores, they're far better than the traditional public schools. And what it tells you is that if you give that group of kids a chance to succeed, they will. But you got to put them in the right environment. And I think a school like Noble has done a great job of doing that.
Ma'am, you had a question?
Yes, I'm wondering if we could perhaps put a little more emphasis on the expense and the power of the bureaucratic element in our public schools, there's a general misconception that we don't spend enough on our schools. And when you actually quote per capita amounts, for example, years ago, a school in New York was spending roughly the equivalent of a Harvard tuition, and we're getting Harvard results, needless to say. So there's just misinformation out there. I think it is much easier to get the public and even teachers behind you if you focus your message on how overpriced and oversized the bureaucratic elements of the school. Make it not against the teachers, but against, everybody hates the back office people. Everybody loves the teacher. Maybe we could shift our focus, maybe get more teachers on the message too. Do you think we're doing that well enough?
No, I think you're right. We've done a little bit of that. If you look at the growth of students, it's not that large. If you look at the growth of teachers, it's certainly higher. If you look at the growth in administrators, it's like that. It's phenomenal. And if you look at some of you guys have all seen the superintendent pay and the superintendent pensions. You're absolutely right. Somehow, I think there's a lot being done, but somehow it doesn't get the traction. And I can't explain why. We do a lot of that. The Tribune does a lot of that. People love to do that. I think in the end, I think there's a big problem in Illinois where and this is a challenge we have as a state, is that so many people are just, that's Illinois. They're almost like giving up on it. This is becoming status quo. That's just how it works in Illinois. And I think it might take a bankruptcy through the pensions or something like that to wake everybody up to get away from that kind of apathy.
I don't think we have to wake anybody up. I think we got to replace some politicians and just vote to pass the damn law. I mean, the polls show 60% of parents support vouchers, real school choice. So we don't need to persuade anybody. We don't need to even convince them that we're spending too much and that there's a lot of waste. I mean, I think people look at it and understand that. Why are we paying people who work 9 months out of the year $120,000 to teach fifth graders? I mean, it's just unnecessary. So I think people get it. I think it's politics. We just got to get the law changed.
One quick point on that note, and that is that here's a stat that's very easy to remember, and you can back it up with NCES, National Center for Education Statistics data. There are about 6.3 million people employed in the public education system in this country, and about 3.2 million of them are teachers. Half the system is administration. And sometimes when you're talking to someone who isn't really with you on a lot of these issues, even telling them that puts the wedge in their mind. It's like, wait a minute, this person might be right about that. And with that in mind, Diane, you get the next question.
Just because I want to push back on Joe a little bit here, if all we need to do is elect the right people, why aren't we doing that? Why are we not, if 60% of the public supports vouchers and supports school choice, why are they not electing people who support vouchers and support school choice?
Because teacher unions pour millions of dollars, and administrators and superintendents pour hundreds of millions of dollars into these political campaigns. As we said at the beginning of this conversation, the other side is hugely powerful. And you don't see an interest group that wealthy, that well organized and united to oppose reform in any of the other public policy arenas that I'm familiar with.
So we need campaign finance reform.
I think we need a Republican governor who says we got to pass this, and just like Scott Walker. I mean, they went from majority Democrats in the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion to Republican majorities in all three. That change occurred over the course of 4 years,
Well,
8 years.
I mean, they had school choice in Milwaukee long before that happened, though.
But I think what's neat, and that's why we have to stay optimistic, and why we have to keep. It takes time. It's taking too long and longer in Illinois, but we've got to keep this idea and this reform or transform alive, because 3 years ago, who would have bet that Michigan, right? Michigan, the home of the UAW, would be passing right to work. That's phenomenal, right? So if they can do that, we can be optimistic. But I think it revolves around doing a lot of right things. So,
It's Jennifer?
Yes.
Yeah, you had your hand up first, and then next is Jeff.
Okay.
A lot of J's today.
I have 4 children from 22 to 8, and I have used almost every school choice option out there dependent upon the different needs of children. In the very beginning, I homeschooled on my own dime. Then I went to private school with my first 2 attending school. One of them was not learning to read in that environment because often private schools do not have specialists and things like that. So they went back into the public schools for quite some time. Then in high school, one of my children had chronic migraine headaches that affected him nearly every morning. And I was lucky enough to be in the Douglas County school system that has a virtual school for the county as well as the brick and mortar. So he was able to enroll half-time in the virtual school and then attend class at the brick and mortar in the afternoon. My 8-year-old has attended charter school in a very small rural district. And my experience was there were actually more special needs children in that school than there were in the public school. They had full-time aides in addition to the teacher. They had some kids who had to be held in her class during certain exercises because they couldn't handle the stimulation and that sort of thing. And those parents had chosen the charter school because they thought it would be a kinder environment for their child as opposed to the public school that was a little bigger and less regulated. We did homeschooling through a virtual academy in one corner of the state because in Colorado, you can open enroll in another district. So you open enroll in that district, and then those dollars go to that district, and they had a virtual school. And so her relationship with her teacher was on the computer. And right now she's open enrolled in another public school because I've moved to Chicago, and she needed to be in an area where my husband was working, so my husband could play Mr. Mom and pick her up, take her to activities and things instead of having a 30-minute drive. So my point to all of this is you really do empower the parent by providing all these choices, and you don't know what each family is struggling with, whether it's learning disability or a medical condition, whether it's unemployment issues or work issues that have caused some kind of chaos in their lives. And quick question about the savings accounts. If there's money left over in those when they graduate high school, does that get to follow them to college? And then second, why don't teachers understand that if education is opened up as a marketplace, that all of a sudden market forces are going to be working in their favor, and perhaps they would get a job for 5 second graders in Barrington to be their teacher for 4 hours a day and be able to go home and be with their own children or something?
I can answer the second one. While you think about college tuition coming out of those savings accounts and some of the constitutional issues, I guess that raises. But on the second one, there's been some great research on teacher burnout, the phenomenon of teachers getting very frustrated and giving up on their profession, but they stay there because the pension system is designed to reward them for staying that extra 10 or 15 years. And what the research finds is that you can measure burnout. 20% of the teachers are burned out by some survey that they can take. And then you compare how good a job are they doing compared to the other teachers. There's no difference. There's no difference. A burned out teacher is doing just as good as a teacher who says, I'm happy and I like to come to school every day and blah, blah, blah. And the researchers who did this work, they're at the University of Texas in Austin, said it's because the good teachers have left the public schools, that they have options. They're skillful. They can go and work somewhere else. They can go back to school and get a law degree. They can do all these different things. The ones who are left in those schools, burned out or not, are not highly talented, hard-driving, world-changing professionals. And so, indeed, they don't have much of an opportunity or a future ahead of them outside of the public schools. So you don't get a lot of public school teachers expressing enthusiasm for going out, becoming entrepreneurs, and starting their own schools. They've left already.
Jeff, you were next.
Jeff Berkowitz, host and producer of TV show Public Affairs. As I've heard the discussion for the last 20 minutes, maybe longer, there are 3 major problems here. I mean, it really is just about, as Joe says, the political issue. How much does it take to bribe a politician? That's basically it, okay? And why is it so damn difficult? I think that's what Joe was saying.
That's what I'm saying.
The second thing is, you folks are, keep it simple, stupid. I mean, I've done 800 TV shows, probably on 80% of them talk about school vouchers, and these people flog all the issues, and, you know, I could run through them, charter schools, well, how they're gonna be accountable, who's gonna be manageable, the data show they don't outperform. Carol Marine says that twice a month on Chicago Tonight. So the messaging issue is important. And 3, even, you know, Ted, I gotta say, you said there's a religious issue with school vouchers, and you get around that by education savings stamps. I mean, the Zellman decision 10 years ago removed that issue. So we have people who know, and I don't say that to chide you, because you know a great deal about this. The point is, keep it simple, stupid. Okay? You got people out there who are your opponents, they keep it simple. They're unions, they're public sector unions, they're teachers unions. Get the money, get the law so it gets in the hands of the unions, and then give it to the politicians. It takes so little. It takes so little to bribe these folks. I mean, Republicans are out there. I'm serious. If you can, we're talking $1,000 or something, and you bring them over.
Well, and as you know, Jeff, the Republicans in this state are bribed by the same people who bribe the Democrats.
Right. No, and that's the point to Joe. It's hard because there's nobody else. They've got the teachers unions. Who do you have? I mean, you got like Heartland. You got the Heartland Policy Institute. You got these other groups. There are no advocacy groups out there who can coerce and bring money in and say, I give it to you, I give it to you, I give it to you, Democrat or Republican, I don't really care who you are, just vote my way or you lose the money. And it's simple. I mean, I just look at this stuff. I mean, read Rich Miller and Capital Effects. I mean, it's simple. It's politics.
Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. And to prove your point, in Ohio, White Hat Capital, I'm going to forget the name of the guy who ran that, but Ohio has a voucher program. Is it for the city only? Cincinnati? Cleveland, yeah.
And it's the voucher program that created the Zellman decision.
That's
yeah,
correct.
there's Cleveland. And the other thing
well,
is...
sit down with him and ask him how he got that legislation passed in Ohio. And he says, I just said, I'll give any legislator $1,000 if he agrees to vote for this thing. And I need you to vote for it 3 times, in committee, and if it gets rejected, then put it back up there, and then a final time. After that, you're on your own. And he said they lined up at my door, Joe, and they just lined up. And I just was cutting all these $1,000 checks, and sure enough, we just got it. And you don't buy them, you rent them. Just rent them long enough to pass the bill.
Right, yes. And I don't know the answer. You folks, you would know, isn't there some source that can collect money and give it out, just like unions do? I don't, apparently not, because it's not happening. But the other thing is, this thing about school vouchers or save, I just keep it simple. We spend $15,000 per kid per year in CPS. Now, I was talking with Alderman John Areno, a show that will air in a week or 2, and he made a point, and maybe it's true. That's an average number. I mean, I get that number by the budget is roughly $6 billion. It's a little less. It was $6 billion, maybe it's 5.3 now. 400,000 students. Put 400,000 into $6 billion, you get 15,000. You don't hear that from any governor, Republican or Democrat. They take these report cards, they don't count capital costs, they don't count this and that. But that's the number, and if you just say to anybody, I do it all the time to politicians on the show, take the 15,000. Would you like to give it to the parent? I did that to Barack Obama. Would you like to give it to the parent and let them choose? If they're happy in the public school, the money stays there. If they're not, I use the analogy of a backpack. So throw the 15,000 in a backpack. If they're happy, the backpack stays there, the cash stays there in the public school.
So Jeff, is this? Are you going to run?
I'm always tempted.
If you run, I'll help finance your campaign. I don't have a lot of money, but I'll write you a check. So this is the whole point, because we've got folks on our side, and I think that your question to the panel is actually a very good one, and the points you raise are very important. But until someone who knows the issue, or is willing to learn the issue, like Tom knows the choice issue and is willing to vote for it, until we get half of the House and 27 or 28 senators
30.
And 30 senators or something like that to actually vote for it, and some Democrats will vote for it. We're not going to get that. But everybody in this room needs to understand what Jeff is saying. At the end of the day, it's going to be a pitched political battle with the most powerful lobbying force on the planet. And I know there were a couple of people that wanted more questions, so if you have a really quick question.
Well, just let me say one thing. I don't know if it's a question.
Well, we can always put you on the panel on the next one.
No, well, okay, now.
Jeff
now I
knows
just
more
lost it.
about this than most of us do, so I'm
Yeah.
Go ahead.
eager to hear your.
No, I mean,
your
I've just,
point.
just to pull the, like, who's the guy from Texas? Yeah, 3
Perry.
points, yeah, Perry lost it, so I'm just keep it simple. Oh, if you look at the gubernatorial race, to show this is not particular to school vouchers, it's anything. Take state employee pension reform. You've got 4 Republican gubernatorial candidates. Did you know that Dan Rutherford has become a constitutional scholar? Did you know why he voted against state employee pension reform? Because it's unconstitutional. Dan didn't go to law school, but suddenly no, Dan is low on money. He's got $1 million, that's more than Dillard has, but that's not a lot relative to Rauner. So he's playing footsies with the public sector employee unions. This is not against Dan or anything, it's just a statement of fact that you don't hear. He is playing footsie, okay? By that vote, it means he's open to maybe being a little bit more helpful to those public sector employee unions. My point is, it doesn't matter whether it's school vouchers, whether it's pension reform, I never took a political poli-sci 101, but from doing this show, I learned what's obvious, which you see over here. It's just about money, okay?
So the
Dan needs
lesson
the
there
money,
is
so he needs, and the same thing with Kirk Dillard.
to buy your
Dillard,
legislator.
says he voted against it. You know what? He didn't have enough time. So you have 2 of your 4 Republican candidates. Now, I know Ted. Last thing, I know Ted would say there are reasons to vote against it. The point is, they didn't vote against it for the reasons you would advise them to. They voted for the same reasons that Joe is talking about. It's all about money. So get the public policy right, get the message right, and then just get the money and get the guys to vote your way, or the ladies. And it's so simple. It's like taking candy from a baby. I don't know how we make people who support school voucher, school choice, make it so difficult, but we do.
Well,
All right, go ahead, and then I
Yeah,
got
that's what-
2 more questions from people.
So Jeff, I don't think anybody can disagree with you that money is the driver, right? The question is, if you can't get it, what do you do? And sometimes to get that money, you've got to get your messaging right. We talk a lot at the Illinois Policy Institute about the vice, three-pronged vice. There's a legislator in the middle of the vice, and that legislator is going to react to 3 things: how the media spins things, how public opinion, the masses, push on the legislator, and how influencers, unions, money, and we got to move on all 3 of those as a movement. And what we're trying to do is, we're trying to raise more money. That's a hard part. What we can certainly do is do a better job messaging, because in the end, what we've got to do is get the legislator to feel the pressure, not just on the money side, because we can win it by getting by the legislator to feel the pressure from people. And when you see an event happen out there, the left always has not just the money, but they got the people movement. They're marching. We're nowhere. We're all working, trying to earn a living. And so I think we've got to figure that out too, Jeff. If it was that easy, we just raise money and we'd be done. But that's the problem, right? So we've got to get the messaging right so that we can get people to move, so that we can get the money. So it's you're right, it's simple, but it's really hard.
Mark.
So tonight in Wilmette, there's a big meeting for Common Core. I guess there's like 125 people there explaining why Common Core is so great. And there's a huge push on this. And I remember a couple years ago when Romney was running, he wanted to abolish the federal Department of Education, $800 billion. This will just grow the federal Department of Education. And our superintendent and people, they want the money from the federal government. So they're gonna do whatever Common Core says. We're gonna take kids out of gym to do diversity training, we're gonna do this and that. And there should be just a whole panel just on Common Core. I like to say Common Core bad. For Tom, I'm surprised you don't say Common Core terrible. Opt out is what, I was at a school board meeting a month ago, and I said, let's just opt out, and we won't discuss Common Core anymore. And they mocked me and laughed at me. And that's what I've been telling people. Opt out, we want nothing to do with Washington, and I'm up in Wilmette, New Trier. We don't want them telling us what to do with our schools. And I told the superintendent, I said, you're the best superintendent, you don't need them telling you what to do. And he's like, yeah, I know I'm great, but we want the money. And that's what it's all about. And that's why Common Core is not gonna go away. And it's a huge, terrible thing. And it's just gonna be more federal government. So what do you think about more federal government in the education? And just more money,
Oh,
more
yeah,
money,
obviously, I'm
more
totally
money?
opposed. I mean, there's a group, Stand for Children, that's active here in Illinois and other states in the country. I'm fairly close to them. I mean, there are some initiatives of theirs I support. And so they've asked me to keep an open mind on it. They're in favor of it. And so I'm just trying to do my diligence as I have time. Like I said, not being on the education committee anymore, I've had my hands full with the pension issue and insurance and a lot of other initiatives that are going on right now. But anyway, I remain very, very highly skeptical of it for the reasons that have been cited already.
Okay, we got time for one more question. So it's going to go to Carl because he had his hand up first. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of something Mark said, that's all.
Well, everybody will have a chance to talk afterwards, but go ahead, Carl.
Okay. Highland Park High School spent $720,000 for a room full of 20 kids. Teacher gets $100,000, $20,000 for administration and that. You got $600,000. $120,000 is for pensions alone, representing that one. That comes from the state. Now, they have one person whose only job is publicizing how good the school is. If you go on the report card, for 10 years, it has been on the bad boy list by the federal government. I think they're required to put it on their website, but it's on the last page of their report card, the last 2 pages they mention how they're standing with a certain group. They blame it on, the poor kids in school. But basically what is missing is the kids are not motivated. How can you, by state legislation, eliminate that they can't hire people for the sole purpose of publicizing the school? They have the same thing over in Lake Forest. They pay $200,000 in Lake Forest, whose only job is to publicize how good the school is. That's the whole job.
I don't know that we need more state legislation. I think just the people who live in those districts have to put a lot more pressure on the school board members to...
Point of order on a question, could you pass legislation or could you at least introduce legislation saying that no public school, no public employee in the state of Illinois can receive a salary or benefits or compensation higher than the governor? And you will depopulate education administration by 40% overnight because, and we should ask ourselves, clearly none of these people's jobs is as hard or as meaningful or as useful as a governor who's got to run a state, even Pat Quinn. Just a thought.
We've introduced a bill to outlaw the sale of lion meat in Illinois, so I'm sure... Lion meat, yeah, so I'm sure that we could at least introduce that bill.
And therein lies the problem. We've got to close this event. Obviously, there's a lot of smart people here. There's people stick around and ask and answer questions, so I just want to wrap this up for people and kind of like give you a framework maybe. And I've tried to do this everywhere I can in talking about all these knowledgeable people who have all the information that's out there in the grassroots and all the knowledge up here at the podium in their experience in school choice. The reason I want to push the envelope and the reason I talk about pushing the envelope is if you listen to this conversation that we have, half of the people are like, well, I just want the kids in the existing system to get slightly higher test scores. And I submit to you that that's not going to happen under this system, and B, we wouldn't want it to, because this system is costing too much and it's spending too much, which is why I'm an evangelist against the concept of reform and for the concept of transformation. And I want to leave you really quickly with this one idea, and this goes right to the point of defeating Common Core, which I call the last gasp of centralization. I'm going to read you from this article, and it's very simple. They were doing some brain studies, and they invented a toy. They invented a toy that had 27 or 8 or 10 or 15 different functions. And they told one set of children one of the things that the toy did. If you press this button, it goes beep, beep, beep. So think about that. One set of children, they told those children what one thing the toy did. And they gave the other kids the toy and didn't tell them anything about what it did. And the kids who weren't told anything, on average, discovered 30, 40, 50% more of the toy's functions than the kids who were told one thing the toy did. And if you ever want to persuade somebody about why centralization doesn't work, about why the district system is an utter and complete failure, and why top-down, one-size-fits-all education coming from Springfield and coming from the federal government does not work, that story should do it. And I'm going to talk to Jim, and maybe we can get that up on the Heartland website or do a quick thing in School Reform News on that. And with that in mind, folks, all I'm saying is that all the information is right there. The policies that the Illinois Policy Institute, the policies that Tom is promoting, the policies that Joe has been in the rooms where those policies were born, because he was around when the Earth's crust was still warm and giants walked its surface. The fact is, every single one of those policies, school choice, vouchers, education savings account, education tax or tuition tax credits, charter schools, every single one of those things fracks. It literally does what fracking does to get us all our natural gas and oil now. It fracks the system of its money, of its victims, and its students, and it puts those children in a place where they can learn. And with that, thank you very much.